Okay, settle down. Yes, this is a review, but you need to know a thing or two before I either drool over the Mojo 2 or I poke it with a pointy stick. Hello and welcome to this week's review, and we're looking at a new product from Chord. It's the Mojo 2, a headphone amplifier DAC. It's a little dinky thing, but this little box has a lot of history behind it. Now, chances are you've already seen reviews of the Mojo 2, and you'll see a lot about how it works and the tech specs, how it compares to the Mojo 1, and yada yada yada. Now, I'll get to that, sure. And that's all fine if all you want to do is close your eyes and hand over your cash. No problem at all. And many people will, I'm sure. But if you really want to appreciate this product, you need to take a deep breath and you need to look around. What I mean by that is the Mojo 2 has not emerged fully formed, feathers dripping wet from a digital egg. The Mojo 2 is part of a long-term design evolution from one man, and that man is Rob Watts. When Mojo 2 designer Rob Watts were a lad, he co-founded a company called Deltec, along with his then partner Adrian Walker, and the pair met at university in Cardiff. Back then, in the late 80s, he released his first DAC, and that DAC was called the DAC-P1. At that time, DACs were, how can I put this? Weird. They were weird. What I mean by that is, not many people understood them. This was the late 80s, after all. Not many people knew what they were for, and why they even existed. I actually have a print review of one of Deltec's DACs here from the early 90s, I think it was. It was a DAC called the Little Bit, and the DAC is referred in that review as a CD converter. How quaint. Back then, DACs were bizarre creatures, exotic boxes aimed at hi-fi nerds, and that was Rob Watts back then. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that Rob Watts is not a new boy. He's not fresh off the boat. Watts has been in this game a long, long time. And in terms of DAC knowledge and DAC insight and DAC potential, Rob Watts knows as much, if not more, than most of the largest and established DAC chip companies in the world today. He had and still has a drive to innovate in the digital space, to push onwards, in fact. So, for example, Watts invented something called the DDFA, which is Direct Digital Feedback Amplifier technology. He did this for a chip manufacturer called CSR. The end product of that was a whole range of products from NAD. He also created the WTA, the Watts Transient Aligned filter, and the Pulse Array technology, both of those for Chord. I get the feeling that Watts is never satisfied, which is how it should be for any innovator, at least in technological terms. He wants to see what's around the next corner. Now, I remember talking to Rob Watts back in, what was it, 2013, and I was reviewing a Qt HD DAC for the UK national newsstand magazine Hi-Fi World. In that product, Watts included a DAC chip of his own design, a FPGA, which is Field Programmable Gate Array, a chip that he created to his own specifications. Now I had to ask, why not use an off-the-shelf DAC chip? Something from, I don't know, Wolfson maybe, or Burr Brown perhaps? And Rob Watts gave me an answer, and he said, and I quote, "Because they sound crap." Now, that statement gave me an inkling into the mind of Rob Watts, also his single-minded passion for DAC design and construction. Referring to DAC chips from the more established companies, Watts added this, and I quote again, "They don't even do listening tests. It doesn't feature on their event horizon. Design is all done mathematically. They make assumptions and then they just do it." According to Watts, technocrat graduates populate these companies, showing a greater interest in mathematics than audio. And that's what I'm all about as well. I couldn't care less about the maths. I couldn't care less about the science or the physics or the measurements. I buy hi-fi to get closer to the sound. I don't buy hi-fi as a mental exercise. To me, a DAC is not a crossword in an aluminium case. This is why I have time for Rob Watts. This is why I wanted to review the Mojo 2. Now, before we get to the crux of this matter, the Mojo 2 itself, I do have some extra information here on Rob Watts' use of the FPGA chip, why that's important, the notion of the DAC chip design itself, and Watts' use of so-called taps, also filters and timing in digital music. Now, if I talked about all of that here, half of you would suddenly remember a dramatically important dentist appointment. So, because of that, I'm going to put that lot in the description down below. If you want to read it, check out down there. Okay, let's talk about the Mojo 2 and let's talk about its inherent design. The Mojo 2 is compact and fits easily in the hand and also the pocket, although that depends on the size of your pocket. It's a truly portable device, that's true, but it's also solid, being built from a single piece of aluminium, as was the original Mojo 1. Those with a keen eye will notice that the notches for the rubber bands to strap your Mojo to other devices have now gone. For me, this is no great shakes, as most people will use broad-based non-slip bands anyway. Like the Mojo 1, the power button and volume controls remain positioned at the top of the Mojo 2 via Chord's preferred coloured marbles interface, although those little marbles are now reduced in size. There's also a fourth marble button, one more than the three resident on the 1. This extra button is devoted to the 2's menu. On the side of the 2, you'll find a USB-C port and micro USB inputs. Both can handle 32-bit 768 kHz. There's a dual data 3.5mm coax input that can also run 768 kHz if hooked up to Chord's M scaler. To finish, you'll also find an optical port as well as a USB charging port. Be aware that if you do charge the Mojo 2 with an external power supply, make sure it offers a minimum of 2 amps. Continuing the chassis tour, you'll also find 2 3.5mm headphone output sockets, but just be aware that the headphone outputs are not independently controllable. It's a shame from my own perspective that one of those outputs couldn't have been a 6.35mm socket. Also, for the price, I would have liked to have seen a balanced output, but then again, Chord vociferously disagrees with me. They say that, and I quote, "Pulse array DACs are single-ended, so going balanced would have made it sound worse." Now, before I go any further, I'd like to emphasize one aspect of this design. It's a crucial part of the Mojo ethos, and it's this. Be aware that, apart from minor chassis labeling and a couple of pictorial punctuations, the Mojo 2 does not use numbers, letters, or any other written form to convey information. This is a color-based interface. Now, if you want to stay friends with the Mojo 2, you need to get used to color. You have to be friends with color. If you become a regular Mojo 2 user, color will play a big part in your life. Color is where it's at. If you have no wish to commune with color, then you'll have to wave farewell to the Chord Mojo 2. And after that Pantone paragraph, we will continue. To bring life to this bejeweled box, you press the power button for all of 2 seconds. When this happens, all of the buttons will light up in a joyous rainbow celebration that resembles Blackpool illuminations during a wet Wednesday in December. The Mojo 2 will then preview its color palette as the buttons flip from one shade to another until a built-in relay soft clicks just the once. If you leave the Mojo sitting there without any activity, it'll get bored and switch itself off after about 10 minutes or so. Speaking of which, the Mojo 2 features a new battery, which means you get 8 hours of constant playback use. Power button also pulls double duty because it will also display the sample rate during playback in a color-coded form. When the battery is being charged, a little light right underneath the charging port flashes a pulsing color, which gives you an indication of how far the Mojo 2 is to a full charge status. With an external charger attached and the Mojo 2 turned off, the menu button will illuminate, telling you how things are going. That is, it will tell you how fast you can expect your unit to charge and if there's enough juice entering the system in the first place. So, for example, a red light is an indication that you need to up your game in charging terms and get yourself a more powerful charger. If you hook up the Mojo 2 to a Mac, for example, then you're ready to go. You'll need to update the Mojo 2 though if you want to use the 2 with a Windows device, but you can find those drivers and updates on the Chord website. If you want to use the Mojo 2 with an iOS device, then you'll need a USB to Lightning adapter. Android devices though can connect directly via USB. In use, if you press the volume up and down buttons simultaneously, the Mojo 2 will mute. Otherwise, pressing the volume up or down increases and decreases volume by 1 decibel per push of a button. Now, if you do select one of the menu options, that option will be saved after a reboot. One of the features found in the menu options is a selection of 4 EQ settings. These are basically tone controls in effect to change the sound output called UHD DSP, a supposed lossless digital signal processor that's backed by the Mojo's 104-bit processor. Each EQ setting includes steps of adjustment. This feature also adds crossfeed. Now that's something that users of Dave and Hugo 2 DACs will be all too familiar with. It sort of alters the nature of the soundstage and the direction of sound so that you can change from the traditional headphone-like soundstage of left and right to something akin to listening to speakers where you have the sound coming more in front of you. Now there's also a lockdown mode. No, this doesn't cut car engines or close down runways or lock the local population in their house until further notice. Instead, it locks the buttons on your Mojo 2. This is useful if you're on the move and you don't want to risk accidentally changing the settings when the Mojo 2 is jostling about in your bag. In terms of compatibility, rest assured, if you own a Poly streaming device, the 2 will work with that. I think Chord is issuing a firmware update. I think that's version 3.0, so check out that. The Poly needs to be on the latest firmware version to work with the Mojo 2. Plus, users will also need the latest version of Go Figure. Now, anyone buying a new Poly will have the latest 3.0 firmware pre-installed. So, how does this thing perform? Well, let's check out the sound quality tests and we'll find out. Welcome to the sound quality tests for the Chord Mojo 2. And to test the Mojo 2, I brought in my trusty ATC HDA-P1. I also grabbed an hifi Nano and an original Mojo 1. No surprise there. Now, yes, some of these boxes are set at a lower price, but I did that on purpose because I wanted to see if the Mojo 2 was worth the extra cash. After all, there's plenty of good stuff at half the price of the Mojo 2. So is it really worth bothering spending the extra money for a Mojo 2 in the first place? This lot was powered by my MacBook laptop and a red wine modded Aston & Kern AK120 DAC, and I listened to the whole thing with a pair of Sennheiser HD660Ss and HD800 headphones, plus a pair of Meze 12 Classic earphones. I started with my laptop as a source and played some jazz. Specifically, I grabbed Charles Lloyd's How Can I Tell You from the album Manhattan Stories, which I played at 24-bit 44.1. Now, despite the rather lovely approach from the ATC, which was a rather romantic, slightly warming sound, the ATC could not compete with the detail and the insight from the mid-range area via the Mojo 2. The hifi Nano was a far greater challenge. Low in noise and smooth in the mid-range, the output was measured and relaxed. Again though, the Mojo 2 offered more insight, a greater weight and amount of information, and a real sense of focus that picked out the fine detail right across the frequency spectrum. Now, sure, that shouldn't be a real surprise considering the higher price of the Mojo 2, but it's reassuring to know that the extra money is going somewhere useful. Comparing the Mojo 2 with the Mojo 1, well, there are definite improvements in clarity from the Mojo 2. The Charles Lloyd saxophone was decidedly more reedy in its delivery, while the Mojo 1 was a little rolled off in the upper mids by comparison. The Mojo 2 extended that little bit further. The guitar on this track from the Mojo 2 was rather more focused as well, and it was further forward in the mix. The Mojo 1 offered a lovely sound in isolation, but compared to the Mojo 2, it could sound slightly veiled around those upper mids. And that goes for the treble as well. Cymbal taps around the 3-minute point on this jazz track offered a crisp strike and a wider and longer reverb tail from each tap from the Mojo 2. Bass from the Mojo 2, while not offering any real punch or extra power, it did provide greater precision. I felt that bass had a tightened response so that the string plucks on an upright bass had rather more impact. Now, moving to my modded AK120 and Bob Marley's track Jamming at 24-bit 96K, I was impressed by the rolling bass, which had a heft but never boomed or ballooned. It remained firm with a sense of focus, and I was glad to hear that the bass didn't swamp the mids. There was plenty of detail to go around here, from the clarity of the female backing singers to the many drum tones from percussion. The rhythm guitar, which had that iconic reggae chaka, I'm sure you know the sound I mean, well, that guitar can on some systems sound a little edgy, I suppose, but the recording from the Mojo 2, it did retain a sense of balance and neutrality that maintained discipline and order right across the frequency spectrum. Playing punky reggae party from Mali, I tried the EQ selection, which performed as expected, adding gradual emphasis both in the lower and higher frequency regions. Now, this can be a useful tool, especially if you're in noisy environments and you don't run a pair of noise cancelling headphones, for example, and you're also struggling to hear your music. I've been on some noisy trains, for example, where this sort of tool can really come into its own. Now, for more dynamic action, I turn to Dire Straits' Money for Nothing at 24-bit 88.2, a track that can be a little brittle in the upper mids on some systems. Via the Mojo 2, well, I could hear a slight tense mid-band, but even so, I was impressed how generally balanced this track was. The lead guitar especially can be a touch on the, well, on the cutting side, but not here. The Mojo 2 managed to retain a sense of discipline that kept any possible wayward frequencies in check. The Mojo 2, well, it cracked the whip with a sense of efficiency in this department. Bass offered a thumping rhythm, giving the track a real forward motion. This drive forward allowed the music to keep a pretty fast pace. The music never ever dragged with the Mojo 2. So, how do I conclude the review of the Chord Mojo 2 headphone amplifier and DAC? Essentially, what you've got here is an update of the Mojo franchise. A Mojo for a new decade, in fact. The Mojo 1 was aimed at the noughties, the Mojo 2 for the roaring 20s. Well, roaring by the storms we've had here lately. The Mojo 2 gives you tweaks, it gives you enhancements and improvements in terms of the basic design and form factor, while the interface remains largely familiar. What really hits the spot, though, is the sound quality improvements that provide a boost in clarity and detail. On that point alone, I would recommend an upgrade from the Mojo 1 or a close look if you're previously unfamiliar with the Mojo concept as a whole. It's been a while, but I'm glad the Mojo 2 has finally arrived. It's been well worth the wait. And that's it, folks. Thank you very much for sticking with me to the end of this video, and I appreciate all your support. And could I ask you, if you wouldn't mind, please, down there, if you could click on the like and subscribe buttons, please. It just helps the channel to move across the choppy waves of the YouTube algorithm. Check out down below in the description for more information on the design ethos I mentioned earlier on from the designer Rob Watts. There's also a list of chapter headings if you want to navigate around this video. There are links down there to my Facebook group, which you're welcome to join, as well as my website, which has a host of information on there you don't normally see on this channel. Also, if I could ask you to ponder, to muse upon, to consider actually subscribing to my Patreon page, because doing so keeps this channel alive. Any help you can provide is much appreciated and actually does keep this channel in existence. Now, I will be back for Tuneful Tuesday, and I think Tuneful Tuesday this time round, we're looking at a Masterworks, I think, and there may be a bit of a bonus after the Masterworks, so don't forget to hang about after that. So we'll have a Masterworks and some sort of extra bonus bit at the end. Anyway, should be packed full of goodies, no matter what. Check out Tuneful Tuesdays, and I will see you then. So, until that time, folks, bye-bye for now.